Welcome to Odyssey. Odyssey is a show where we discuss the frontier of crypto's opportunities and challenges in driving real-world impact in the societies of tomorrow. Odyssey is produced thanks to the support of Safe and Ambire Wallet. Safe is the most trusted decentralized custody protocol and collective asset management platform on Ethereum and the EVM. Ambire Wallet is an advanced smart wallet that utilizes account abstraction, acting as a gateway to Web3 applications and providing users with secure and effortless management of their digital assets. You'll hear more about them later on in the show. Let's get to it, friends. Welcome back to another episode of Odyssey. On today's episode, we have Chika, who is the co-founder of Afropolitan. Afropolitan is building a network state for the African diaspora. They've had some incredible growth, and in my opinion, Afropolitan has been pioneering the way with regards to how we can actualize and materialize the network state thesis that is laid out by Balaji, among other thinkers and builders in the space. I was incredibly excited to have her on the podcast. Throughout this conversation, we discuss her background. She tells us a little bit about Afropolitan's founding story and gives us even a step-by-step breakdown with regards to how one could build their own network state if so they chose to. Something I really enjoyed in this conversation as well is the emphasis that Afropolitan has with regards to world building. They really try to hone in on how do we build a journey of abundance. As you know, the subtitle for this podcast is Journeys Towards the Infinite Garden. And genuinely, this is rooted in this notion of we can collaborate and coordinate to create more abundant, more flourishing livelihoods, something that I believe Afropolitan is doing today. One of the other really interesting pieces of this conversation is what Chika learned at Zuzalu. Zuzalu is a network state pop-up city started by Vitalik, among others in the space, where she and her co-founder Eche spent 2 months at Zuzalu. She tells us a little bit about what she learned, what she saw, and where she would like to continue to see more growth in the network state ecosystem. Lastly, we discuss and explore the true impact and opportunity that crypto has, particularly in the global south, whether that be in Africa, Asia, Latin America. I was really excited to have her on this podcast, and I think you'll really enjoy this conversation. Chika, it's great to have you on the podcast.
Good to be here.
Awesome. This is a conversation I've really been looking forward to. So, Chika, let's get the audience situated with a little bit of yourself and the work you're doing. Give us the sort of 10,000 foot overview of who you are and what you're up to.
Yeah. So should I go back? I think because I think that's important to understand my story and our story. But I've been building community since the age of 20. Funny enough, started with Niger, DC. So when I was just fresh out of college back in 2010, I think like a year later, we were dealing with fuel subsidy issues in Nigeria. And as someone in the diaspora, I said, well, how can I help? How can I support? I'm not in Nigeria right now, but I want to make sure that my voice is heard. And so a bunch of us came together and formed Niger DC. And we started doing protesting, funny enough, in front of the World Bank in Washington, D.C. And then we started to build out this amazing community of Nigerian, whether they were politicians, professionals, entrepreneurs. And that was kind of my first foray into, building community. I've been in the tech world since maybe a couple of years after that, and first started off with foreign policy, and then transitioned into tech because, funny enough, my dad's a technologist, so I think I got the bug from him. And I think when I started going into tech, I think it's really important to share that you fail, right? You try things, it doesn't work out, and you just keep learning and learning from them. But I think the continuous lesson I started learning from all the tech startups that I started was the importance of community, the importance of intentionality with that community and building, a group that surrounds and supports it and pushes you. And so I didn't realize it at the time that I was building community all these different times. But that was one of the many skills that I kept learning over and over again. And so in 2020, fast forward to that, I built a very big community on Clubhouse. It was the second largest women's group, about 170,000 people. And this was also a group that we used to do collective action. And so that was kind of again, one of the first lessons of building on Afropolitan. And so in 2020, in Nigeria, we were protesting against police brutality. And again, as someone in the diaspora, we were wondering, what can we do? How can we help? And so we started to send money back home to Nigeria for those who are protesting on ground. Interestingly enough, the government stopped all payment railways. And so we had to figure out a solution of how to send money back home. And so we started sending home Bitcoin. And so I was introduced to crypto a little bit earlier than that, but it helped a lot of community members start to see the real use case of how we can use crypto towards collective action. And so we started as a community to send Bitcoin back home to the NSARS movement. And then fast forward to a year later, my partner and myself read the article by Balaji called How to Start a New Country. And that got us starting to tinker around. Oh, like this is interesting. At that point, we didn't think about anything with network states. It wasn't called a network state at that time. It was called a cloud country. And but it just really had us start to really red pill our way into not just crypto, but DAO specifically, how these communities form on chain, and just start to understand that specific use case in the crypto space. And then in December of 2021, we were in Nairobi, me and my partner, and he wakes me up at 5 a.m. and says, "Hey, we need to start a new country." And
I
I was
love
like,
it, as
"Huh?"
one does, right?
I was like, this is crazy. And honestly, that was literally how Afropolitan started, at least this new version. And so we are building a digital nation to help and empower Africans to live abundant lives. That is what Afropolitan is. But very excited to get into the details of what that is and like more of the story of how we formed.
Beautiful, beautiful. So I feel that the Balaji piece, and I know for many of us that are listening to this podcast, the book Network States was really seminal. So what, like when you first read that article, like what was the light bulb that switched on for you in that instance?
Yeah, I thought it was interesting because Balaji did a good job of really getting into the details of how countries were formed. And I feel like it's very important to understand history and reoccurrence of this instance of building countries. And so he goes into those details. And then at the end, he says, but we have a new technology called blockchain, right? And we can do on chain voting, right? We can have a treasury, we can have on-chain consensus, right? And I think these are all concepts that honestly years ago people didn't see blockchain in that way. Like people weren't thinking like, oh, we can use blockchain to vote or have a treasury or organize as a group or vote, do these collective actions. So I feel that that started getting me to think about things in that way. And it started getting me to open my mind into the possibility of something totally new can be formed.
That's exciting. Yeah, I think oftentimes we take like nation states as this immutable, hard fastened body that the hegemon, as it's referred to sometimes. But in reality, it's like they're not that old, right? Nation states are about 400 years old, and there was something that preceded that, and there will be something that comes after that. And I think that being able to mold yourself out of that, but it's ingrained from us from the moment we're pretty much out of the womb, especially if we're from the global south, where like the idea of a nation state, well, really all around the world, right? It's this, you learn the anthem, you learn about your constitution, and it's just like ingrained in your head from like the age of 3, and so all of a sudden to be able to kind of unprogram yourself from that, I think is really fascinating. And it's like, you step out of the matrix in some sense. So let's talk a little bit about like the need for something like Afropolitan, because I absolutely love what you're doing. And when, I know a lot of folks that I'm in contact with that are from the global south, oftentimes it just is like, yes, this is the solution. So give us like the background as to where the African diaspora would need something like this. Like what's kind of the problem you're trying to address?
Yeah, so this is very interesting because, for me, it was quite clear why we needed this. But I feel like, recently I did some deep dive research that reconfirmed why the African diaspora needs this in particular. So I actually did some research around other diaspora groups, right? And I looked at the Chinese diaspora, the Indian diaspora, as well as the Jewish diaspora. And so we look at these three different groups. Chinese diaspora has done a very amazing job of creating different types of entities that pours into the community back in China. And so one of these very well-known ones is Chinatowns, right? And so what has happened is Chinatowns are literally all over the world. They're even in places like even Nigeria. There's literally a Chinatown in Ikeja, in the mainland of Lagos. And so these Chinese towns are an economic um, group that is literally circulating money within the Chinese community. And what's more interesting is that in these Chinatowns, once someone decides to spend $1 in a Chinatown, it circulates about 25 times within the community. So it touches the community very well. Compared to the Black community, a lot of times if a dollar is spent in a Black community, it only circulates around six, which is quite low. And so the Chinese diaspora has figured out a way, even outside of China, how to create an economy. If you look at India, they've done a very good job of outsourcing education. And so it's now gone to the point where it is translated to soft power, where if you look at some of the top tech companies in the US, they're actually now ran by Indian Americans. And now, if we look at UK, for example, it is now an Indian British citizen who is now the prime minister. And so their education that they've really heavily invested in has helped them to translate that into soft power, into connecting into many very key industries. And because many Indian Americans are now CEOs of these organizations, there is now influence back home in India, right? And so they've done a really good job of that. And then lastly, we look at the Jewish community. And I always tell people that the Jewish community is an example of really the first network states, right? And if you look at, there's a specific book called, literally called The Jewish State, funny enough, and it was written by Theodore Herzl. And he talks about, we, the Jewish community, we are marginalized, we're all over the world, we're separated, and we need to find a common ground and a place where we can connect as a group of people. And he does a really good job of painting out what this looks like, building a foundation, building a company that will, facilitate this connection. And that was one of the starts of the Zionist movement. And it actually started with 500 people. And so for over 50 years, there's many meetings and connections that happen. Obviously, the later part is now unfortunately more controversial. But at least in the beginnings of them forming, they were quite intentional, right? And so a lot of people don't realize that there is a fund called the Jewish National Fund. And that it owns 13% of Israel today, right? And so this was a body that was largely financed by the diaspora, right? And so they have figured out a way to connect economically all over the world. And so I did that research and I thought this was very interesting how many of these diaspora groups have figured out how to create economic opportunity for those people. When I look at Africa, we have not done that yet. We have not done a good job of capturing that value. We created value. So, for example, we have done a good job of exporting our fashion. Our music is now, Afrobeats is now considered a global sound now, but we have not captured that value. And so about $70 billion is sent back to Africa every year from the diaspora. But it's not really going towards infrastructure projects and projects that will help to really move Africa forward. And I think the diaspora is quite isolated. I've noticed that quite often when a organization or group, even if we just look at the crypto space, if they're looking to expand in Africa, they don't know where to connect, who to connect with. They feel like it's still a tough area to even navigate. And I also think because while Nigeria, for example, is one of the most educated groups in the US, that hasn't translated into influence. And so when I look at all these different facets, I feel like Afropolitan is really well positioned to finally, number one, bring this community together, create an economic layer where we can have our own treasury, our own voting, our own governance, and also do a good job of actually creating real influence, right? And so that Africa can finally move forward the way that it's needed, whether it's through our own economic power and infrastructure, education, because Africa is the youngest continent in the world. So the average African is 19. And the fact that by 2100, 5 out of the 10 largest countries in the world will be coming out of Africa. So the world is actually going to become more and more African, and it's very, very important that we have a body that's helping to organize, many of these different things.
This is super fascinating. And even I think just like walking through, I think a lot of folks got really excited about network states, they're the new thing. When in reality, it's been around for like, hundreds, maybe thousands of years, right? And so I just think that idea is really fascinating and really prescient in something like a Chinatown too.
Yeah.
In Chinatown is like, and those are decentralized, somewhat
Yep.
governance free. They're not
Yep.
necessarily interlinked in some sense, right? They're all
Yep.
very independent, and I think that's like a great example. So I'm looking forward to the day when we have an Afropolitan town in
Yeah.
every single major urban city, and because and then there already are those pockets, right? I think oftentimes
Yeah.
though the problem is like they're not quite as like organized, or
Yeah.
when you go to it, when you think of a Chinatown, it's like even this like feature that draws you in, right? And so what is sort of unfolded there that I think is really fascinating. So and jumping back to a little bit of the challenge here, I think that the oftentimes, and this is speaking from a Latin American perspective, what we
Mhm.
see is the fact that as a consequence of the colony and the centralization of power, because if you look at regions and supposedly poor countries, there's actually a
Yeah.
lot of wealth in these
Yeah.
countries. The problem is
Yeah.
the distribution of wealth, right?
Yeah.
And the distribution of opportunity. And the reason oftentimes the diaspora exists is because of many times in search of like an alternative sort of story, right? Or an
Yeah.
alternative opportunity. And so being able to think about like, how do we capture all of this value that people from Africa, from Latin America, from Southeast Asia and Asia more broadly speaking are generating, and how do we create this internal economy that I think is really crucial, as folks from Chinatown do. The Jewish community is very good at this as well.
Yeah.
So how can we really foster an internal economy where, hey, we want to support you folks who are, we come from the same place and we have a lot to contribute collectively as well, and being able to
Yes.
organize themselves around that. So I just think that's like a super important thing to like mention as well, is the fact that like there is this centralization that I think needs to be overcome. And when I see the situation in Guatemala, it's like, how
Mm.
are we meant to respond to what is functionally just like a continuation of the colony? And there's a saying in Guatemala that's like, Guatemala is still a finca, which means like a farm. It's still a massive farm,
Mm.
and much of Latin America is still seen that way, where you have these elites. And so it's like, okay, network states I think give us the opportunity to like leapfrog past that into something else.
Yeah.
So like let's get into the nitty gritty here, because I really like, I know this podcast will serve as like a really awesome launch pad for a lot of folks with regards to network states and thinking about, post kind of nation state world. So when you can you give us like a walkthrough of like what was that founding journey for you like with
Mm.
Afropolitan? I know you gave us a kind of 30-second overview,
Yeah.
but how did you intersect all these different features? I know you started off with, events and just gathering people, and the
Mhm.
pandemic came and so you had to shift, and
Yeah.
you recently launched a citizens collection. So give
Yeah.
us kind of that play by play walkthrough.
Yeah. So interestingly enough, as you rightly stated, Afropolitan has been a community for about 10 years. And I think if you look at what actually connects Africans globally, it's actually through um, social, right? Our social fabric is probably one of our strongest points. And so Afropolitan started in San Francisco. So again, in the diaspora, And it was mainly focused on Africans who are working in different tech companies, right? And so, every week or every couple of weeks, we would come together and we would just connect and party and have fun. And then we also did festivals. But a highlight of that version of Afropolitan was actually in 2019. And so the Ghanaian government wanted to start a movement called the Year of Return. And this meant those in the diaspora literally would come back home to Ghana, and it was celebrating, 400 years post slavery. And so Afropolitan was part of that movement, and we helped to facilitate $2 billion worth of economic opportunity in Ghana. And so this is amazing, right? And so
Wow.
what this showed was, hey, we can actually tap into this very powerful diaspora and bring them back home, right? And literally have them physically move from US, UK, Latin America, Asia, all of them to come back to Ghana specifically and enjoy and connect with their Ghanaian roots. And so we were part of facilitating that. And so that was in 2019. In 2020, like I said before, everything shut down and we could no longer physically meet. But we decided to move this community to Clubhouse. And so we connected socially again. But then we also were part of the NSARS movement, which I spoke about before, where we helped to facilitate Bitcoin movement to those who are physically on ground protesting in Nigeria. So this was in 2020. And we created a community about over 200,000 people during this moment. We also were part of, because also Ethiopia was going through some challenges as well. So we also helped to facilitate the gathering of the Ethiopian community as well. And so what we realized was like, hey, we can not only enjoy and party together, but we can actually come together as a community towards collective action, right? And actually make a decision and follow through that decision. And then in 2021, in December, when my partner woke me up and said, hey, we need to start a new country, what was interesting was we were actually we just finished a wedding, right? So we were surrounded by our community. And so we literally went downstairs, and the first person we pitched to, he actually works at Apple and he's Nigerian. And so we pitched him the idea. And he was like, as crazy as this sounds, like at 8 a.m. in the morning, this actually could work, right? And we started like brainstorming with him. We started like literally, we started writing down names, people we needed to talk to. And over a month, we traveled to different countries. So we went to Tanzania, we went to Ghana, we also went to Nigeria. And literally, it was like spreading the gospel, right? And telling people this is what we're thinking. We read this article because at the time, the Network State book was not out. And we
Hmm.
were just pitching to them the idea of Afropolitan. And all the community members not only said, yes, this makes sense, but they actually invested. So the first $1 million that we raised was actually just from community members. And I think it's very key to say this, that it wasn't just like a bunch of VCs putting money into what we're
Hmm.
doing. It was actually individual people who are active members of the community who have seen what we've done with Afropolitan and said, yes, I want to contribute towards this. And I think that is like another key part about these network states is that it should be supported by a community because there's more buy-in from the ground floor. And so we finished raising in around June. And honestly, we started the next part, which was, hey, how do we onboard the first set of people to what we're doing? So we created a manifesto, we put it out there. And this manifesto was simply just stating that, we are tired of the status quo. We are tired of feeling like helpless. We want to move towards something new. And if you're ready to join this journey with us, and for us, one of the key parts of the manifesto is a journey of abundance because Africa for so long has been seen as a place of scarcity that you will join this mission with us. And so we actually reached out to an Afropolitan member. She helped to create a writer's room because when we decided to launch this NFT collection, it was very important that it felt beyond just like I'm buying an NFT. It needed to feel deeper than that. And so we created a whole story around creating an African mythology, because we said, if you're forming a new country, right, you have to get people to imagine this new world, right? And we created a whole mythology with a bunch of Afropolitan members. And we actually partnered with a young artist, Ogosa, who's out of Edo State, Nigeria, and he just created this amazing art. He did weeks of research because we wanted to make sure each art piece looked African. It didn't look like it was Nigerian or Ethiopian or South African. It was very important that it just looked like, oh, this is African, you know. And we actually started with children because we were like, if we're birthing a nation, birthing something new, what better way to start with children, right? Young, innocent, they don't have any preconception of the world as it is, but they're coming to start something fresh. And so Agosto created the art with us, and we created an application process. So you could not buy our NFTs just randomly. You had to go through our applications. And for us, that was a way to filter for alignment. And we also decided, even though we had this huge informal community, we said, let's just get down to 525, right? And start off with these founding citizens. And so we sold those NFTs. It's now minted out. We have 525. You can only have bought one NFT because it's one NFT, one vote. And now we're kind of at the point of, forming out the community DNA, which I can talk about later. But yeah, that's pretty much how we, built out Afropolitan. Again, it's really been informed by the community from day one. And I feel like a lot of these network states are not talking about community enough. So for
Mm.
us, that is like literally at the center of what we do.
Safe, previously known as Safe, is a decentralized custody protocol securing $60 billion in assets today. It is establishing a universal standard for secure custody of digital assets, data, and identity. Safe is on a mission to unlock digital ownership for everyone in Web3, including DAOs, enterprise, retail, and institutional users, both through their Safe core account abstraction infrastructure, and of course, its flagship product, the Safe Wallet, the wallet we all know and love. Start using Safe or building on top of the Safe core account abstraction stack by visiting safe.global. And now, let's get back to the show. Totally, totally, and I thank you for that walkthrough. I think
Yeah.
for folks such as myself and others who are listening to this podcast, like how to start a network state, and many
Mm,
people who are listening are surely going to have that question, and so just getting that walkthrough, because one, it's not just like a hey, let's start a new country, and then a boom, all of a sudden there you go, right? There's like a lot of work involved in that, and
yeah.
so just getting that breakdown is awesome. And I love the fact that like the first capital that you raised was purely sourced by the community, right? As you
Mhm.
said, there are so many folks that are looking at this network state idea, and I think quite frankly going about it in the wrong way and saying like,
Yeah.
oh, this is like an investable business and we need to go to VCs right away. And Griff Green actually talks about the idea that yes, public goods and state infrastructure is a huge economic opportunity, but like let's not just try to exploit that, right? So I definitely like just love and appreciate that whole process. And also, so let's talk, let's kind of take a stop here and talk about world building. You mentioned the
Mm,
writer's room. Seems like that was really important. We started this podcast off talking about how we're like indoctrinated by this like nation state, and how it, from a very early age, it's like, hey, think about the nation state. You are the nation state. Here's your piece of paper that says you're part of this thing. Like, what was the intention with this writer's room and this world building,
mm.
and how did the citizens of Afropolitan receive that process?
Yeah. Yeah, so again, if you actually look at the definition of nation, what it actually means is there's like a shared traits, shared values, shared culture, right? And so for us, what we were asking ourselves is, if we just launch this manifesto and kind of just say buy a citizen pass, right? It may not get that part of, I feel like there's a shared like interest, like a shared value. Like we really wanted people to feel that, right? That was very essential for us. And so we said, let's take a step back. And that's the reason why we didn't just launch a DAO. And we said, how can we build this world building and this feeling of shared and feeling of like I'm seen, right? Like this NFT I have, it feels like a piece of me, right? And so we worked with Joy, who's an Afropolitan member, and she literally put together a writer's room. And for about like about a couple of months, they just met and they talked about like this world that we're building, right? And what's interesting is that when we started, she asked us like, what are the things that are essential to this? And the first thing we said is that it has to feel Pan African, because for so long in Africa specifically, there's almost this feeling of competition. And yes, as a country, technically you do compete to a certain extent for resources. But I feel like what's the missing opportunity in Africa is actually uniting. I think we're much powerful together. And if we're, let's be honest, like the rest of the world sees us as one. Like they don't really recognize, Nigeria is different than South Africa. They don't do that. They just say, all of you guys are Africans. And so it was very important that in the story, we were weaving this Pan African story. Number two, we also said family was really important because unfortunately, the Black family has been broken for many different reasons, right? And so it was very important that we instilled family within this story as well, as she was kind of crafting it out. And then also, we kept telling her abundance, right? Because a lot of people forget how abundant Africa was. I think the only history that people kind of think about abundance is maybe Egypt, but there was Sudan, right? There was the Mali kingdom. Mansa Musa was one of the most wealthiest, he was the wealthiest man in the world at one point, right? There was the Benin kingdom. Like these earrings I have on is actually, this represents the Benin kingdom, right? So
Mm-hmm.
there was many kingdoms that were super rich, abundant, affluent in Africa, and a lot of people forget that history. So it was very important that that was also interwoven into this world building. So today, when you look at our NFTs, you can't really place where they're from. You can see it's African, and that was very important to us. We also made sure that the skin color was vast because a lot of people assume all Africans are black. They're not, right? We have people who are white African. You have Arabic. We have all types of colors. It's a complicated history, to be honest. But it's a varied group of people, and so we have if you looked at the skin tones, I think we came up with like 8 different skin tones. So we have albino, all the way to even those who might have vitiligo, right? So making sure that all these different things that are part of Africa was interwoven into the color stream. And then I think the most interesting part as well was we created an emblem, and that emblem was made out of gold, because again, one of the main resources that's been extracted from Africa is gold, and it's supposed to be our pride and joy, and unfortunately, it's been exploited for so long. So we decided to reclaim that. So if you go to most of our social media, a lot of times you will see this gold emblem, right? Talking about just reclaiming that piece of mineral again. So we did a lot of different thoughts, world building, and then Augusta took many weeks to just research different pieces that Africans wear, our shape, our faces, how we look, and just making sure that there was a lot of variety. So people are quite proud of those pieces. You quite often you see people on Twitter talking about it, and we also made sure to have numbers, right? And so I think what's also been fun is like when I travel all over and we do Afropolitan meetups, people like randomly walk up to me and say like, "Oh, I'm citizen 217, I'm citizen 300, I'm citizen 5." Right? And so
Nice.
already like we're starting to build these rituals of connection with the citizen number as well.
That is so beautiful. And I love
Yeah.
that you've rooted this whole thing in journeys of abundance. And the
Yeah.
subtitle for this podcast is Journeys Towards the Infinite Garden as well.
Mm.
With that same belief, right? Is, hey, we've existed and played in these like extractive relationships where we have these unjust power dynamics, where there is this like extraction of resources and intellect and capital. And let's change that dynamic. We have crypto substrates now to, one, understand those energy flows, and two, think about, hey, like, is this really the direction we want to deal with each other? Is this how, does this really feel fair to all parties involved? And so
Mm.
I know we're going to talk about a little bit of that in just a sec here, but speaking of other network states, you
Yeah.
just came from a really fascinating experiment, Suzalu.
Yeah.
Um, tell us about that. Like, what was that experiment? What did you see? What did you observe? What sort of sparked in your mind with Afropolitan
Mhm.
whilst you were there?
Yeah, so this experiment actually was kicked off and launched by Vitalik. And what was interesting is that he did a review on the network states in August last year, like a month or so after Balaji released his book. And what was interesting was way at the bottom when he talked about like what communities this could actually really be best for, he mentioned Afropolitan because he was talking about international communities. So that's actually how we connected. And then Vitalik invited me and my community to be part of this. And so what was interesting about it was number one, there was it was like it felt like an unconference because every week there was a new theme, and so different themes were explored. Everything from longevity to ZK rollups to public goods to network states. And so every week there was a different anchor theme, and you had residents. So you had people who decided to stay there the full 2 months. So myself and my co-founder, we were residents and we were there from day one. But we also had visitors, and so you had people who came in, just for most of the time because there was a specific subject they were focused on. But what was more interesting was that, they would come, let's say, for longevity, and then they're like, oh, this is so cool. And then like they try to hack their way into like staying longer as well. So I thought that was quite interesting how so many visitors wanted to actually stay longer. It was in Montenegro. So this is a country in the Balkans, and we have never been there before. Many people have never been there before. So it was a beautiful, natural, scenic landscape. But I really just loved meeting the different people. I feel like it was like a cultural exchange. I really got to learn about different people's cultures and what they're doing and how they're connecting. I love the intersectionality of the different types of themes that were brought in, and there was a lot of like community building. So people say, hey, I'm going to teach this subject today, or hey, I'm gonna, build this. I think someone built a sauna or something, like something random, or like there was group hiking, or people decided to, like there was a doctor and someone said, oh, let me, put together this group, or we had weekly town halls, and so they were very consistent about hearing our story, right? And so I think there was a lot of amazing things that happened during that. I think the thing that I walked away with, actually two things. So number one, during the network state conference, there was actually a conference that was put together, during the Zulu experience. And what was funny was we were the only network state where our community members were actually there, right? So
Mm.
about 16 Afropolitan citizens were at the Zulu. Would have been a lot more. There was visa issues, which that's a whole different discussion. But quite a number of people came. And people, whenever we presented, literally all Afropolitan citizens would sit down together, right? And most of them never met each other before. That was also the other interesting thing. And so, but it was kind of like because there was alignment, people just automatically clicked. So they would have dinner together, every night. They were connecting, they were meeting. And I noticed like throughout the time we were there, they were constantly like being together. And so I think it was a testament to how strong the Afropolitan community is, and how we were willing to leave wherever we were in the world and all come together. Number two, like I said before, many people were impressed with Afropolitan because there was quite a number of people that said, I heard about network states, obviously, because I'm in the crypto space, but like seeing you guys, I'm actually seeing like what could happen, like the real element of this thing and why it's being built. So I feel like us being there helped reaffirmed why network states could be quite important. But also, what I learned was that I think we are deciding to do this in 4 phases, and so as you spoke about earlier, we do want to have eventually Afro towns all over the world. But what I realize is that there could be like a way to lean into that step by step. And I feel like Zulu shows that because it's only 2 months, right? And it was in a different part of the world. And it created a very tight knit community. I mean, people are very, very like, when I like left, people like really hugged me, right? Like we felt bonded, and people are already
Mm,
like, "Oh, I'm looking forward to the next time we will meet," right? And so I know a bunch of us will be connecting probably at each CC and funding the Commons in Paris. So what I realized is like, oh wow, like maybe Afropolitan could start off with like 1 month, 2 month places around the world, right? And one example could be extending the year of return celebrations that happen every year in December in Ghana. And most of the time we're there for 2 weeks, but what does it look like to extend it, 3, 4 weeks, right? And have a bunch of people there. So I think it just started getting me thinking through like how we could start to create the physical parts and kind of lean into that larger vision of Afro towns.
amazing. Yeah, I have a bunch of friends that went to Zulu, and I wish I could have been there. Like I just saw the
Yeah,
lineup of the conversations. I was like, oh
yeah,
man, I really want to be there. Unfortunately, I had some other travel plans that
yeah,
conflicted, but I'm just super excited by moving, as you said, away from this like purely digital world and shifting and creating these more physical relationships where you can't transmit a really nice warm big hug over Zoom,
yeah,
right? And so, but I think it's so important to like the human experience. Like we are not just like pixels on a screen. Like we're bodies.
yeah,
We need love. We need affection.
yeah,
We need that warmth to feel the trust as well to build
exactly.
something as complex as a network state. So,
Yeah.
I just absolutely love that you're really having an emphasis later on down the road on Afro towns and how can we bring folks together. So I think the other thing that I find really interesting as well in the crypto ecosystem is the occurrence and connection that happens at these different conferences too.
Mhm.
So you mentioned ECC funding the commons, but even
Yeah,
when you go to Denver or you go to DevCon or DevConnect, whatever that
yeah,
is, it's really beautiful to see these different kind of pockets of folks that you've seen and connected with previously online. And it's like, hey, you get to hang out, you get to dance, you get to just have a genuinely good human time, and
yeah.
again, I think that's such an important part of world building and lore building. So what's coming up for Afropolitan? Like what's the
Mm,
future? You mentioned there's 4 stages. Where are you
mm.
along that journey, and what can we expect to see from the Afropolitan community in the future?
So right now we've launched phase one, which was just building the network and building the community, and we're now doing a couple of things in that phase, which is number one, we are doing a community DNA project. Because, like I said before, me and Ed Shea and actually a bunch of Afropolitans, I wouldn't say it was just me and him writing the manifesto, but we created a manifesto. But we were very intentional to not like build a constitution or be too prescriptive around governance or that structure because we wanted our community members to actually be part of building that. So right now, we actually have a bunch of community members called the Elder Guild, and so these are very active Afropolitans who are leading the weekly conversations around community DNA. Community DNA is composed of three things. So identity, we have a general identity of what Afropolitan is, but we want to go more deeper into that, right? What are our rituals? What are our traditions? What are the things that connect us? And this will also inform when we and bring in more citizens, what is the identity of Afropolitan? We're also looking at the structure as well. And so while we have decided to do one NFT, one vote, we want to go more into detail around the subgroups, the sub DAOs, right? And so that's also something else that is going to be built. And then the third thing is experiences, right? What are the experiences that we want to create within Afropolitan? Already, we do weekly sessions on our Discord where Afropolitan shares specific subjects. So this could be everything from fundraising to education to Tunde, who talked about his nonprofit of teaching Nigerians chess, right? Or young Nigerians chess. And so we're already doing that. We already do meetups, but we want to talk more about like what does experiences look like for Afropolitans. So this is all led by community members, which is great because number one, they are part of shaping what Afropolitan is. But number two, we're decentralizing power, right? And so we're trying to make sure early on we're not the ones doing every single thing, that our members are also contributing as well. And I think the other thing is we're building out our product, and so we are building out a product that will enable a couple of things. Number one, to start to onboard new people who are applying and becoming citizens Afropolitan. Number two, it gives Afropolitan citizens a chance to get access to our events, right? Also access to benefits that we're doing, but also it's going to create a wallet for them. Because one thing we learned through this is that when we did our NFTs, we made sure that you could buy your NFTs through your wallet, but also through credit card, because 70% of the members who joined Afropolitan, this was their first NFT. And so we're also always constantly thinking about how do we onboard people into crypto rails and not make it seem so cumbersome, right? So we're building the wallet in such a way that you can easily just get on, and it's not like you have to do like a seed phrase and all these different things that make it complicated, right? And so it's simple as your email. You can log into your wallet and it's there, right? And so we are building that product right now. And probably by, well, I think we're in second quarter. So probably by like end of third quarter, early fourth quarter, that product will be released, and it's called AfroPass, right? And so those are the two main things that we're working on right now. And then I think the final thing, as well, that we're doing in the immediate time is we want to think through these physical pieces, right? So like I said before, in the future, we do want Afro talents, but how do we leverage that, right? What's interesting is that countries for the first time are competing for talent. And so we've had a number of conversations with different government entities that are interested in housing Afropolitan citizens, right? And so a lot of people don't realize that Africans are really locked out of the world as far as visas. It's very, very difficult for an African to travel around the world. And so Afropolitan has started talking to governments around how can we issue Afropolitan visas to our citizens who want to live in different places in the world. So this does a couple of things. Number one, it helps with mobility with Afropolitans, being able to travel and work in different parts of the world. But also it starts to map out where potential Afrotowns can be, because these are governments that know what we're doing, what we're building, and open to these conversations. So that's one of the other projects that we're looking to do as well. And then lastly, we are launching an investment DAO. And so a lot of founders are in our network. And what's interesting is that we think that there's a cycle that we want to encourage. So there's a lot of very well-known Africans in the diaspora that have done quite well. So either they've exited from their startup or they've done a unicorn. And then what we notice is they invest in local African startups, right? And so we want to encourage this cycle of those in diaspora that have done well and investing back in Africa. And so we've already invested in a few startups, but we're looking to invest in more because there's a huge funding gap in Africa. And we do feel that with the power of the diasporans, right, we can help, again, there's billions of dollars being sent home. Can we take some of that money to invest into the African tech ecosystem? So these are all things we're working on at the current moment.
That's it. Only
Yeah.
launching physical spaces, an app, an investment DAO, enabling the free
Yeah.
movement of Africans.
Yeah, it's a
Okay,
lot.
cool. That's awesome. That's awesome. Well, it's so great to see you guys like really committing to this
Yeah.
work and doing so in an incredible way. And I mean, you went to really one of the top unconferences, as you said, with regards to like network
Yeah.
states with like a lot of really great thinkers and builders. And the fact that, and I can certainly say from my perspective and many others in my communities, like Afropolitan is definitely the referent community for
Mhm.
how one could launch a network state, and just really excited to kind of see you continue along the journey and build and be a beacon for many of us who believe that network states are the next evolution of the nation state or
Yeah.
what comes after, and so just incredibly excited to kind of follow along the journey. So if you haven't yet explored the benefits of smart wallets and account abstraction, you should definitely check out Ambire Wallet. It is the wallet you wish you had when you started your crypto journey. Ambire works with all EVM chains out there, the layer 2s like Arbitrum, Optimism, Polygon, but also non-Ethereum ecosystems like Avalanche and Phantom. you'll never have to spend your valuable ETH again, because Ambire Wallet lets you pay for gas in stablecoins, one of the many perks of smart accounts. The web application of Ambire Wallet offers a number of fiat on-ramps for seamless conversion of fiat currency into crypto. And if you prefer self-custody with a safety net, you can recover a lost Ambire Wallet using an email, address, and password, without giving the Ambire team any control over your funds. Ambire Wallet is available on both mobile and web platforms, providing a range of features including a gas-saving mechanism, effortless integration with multiple dApps, transaction batching, and more cool functionalities to enhance your digital asset management experience. Stay tuned, as an extension of Ambire Wallet is coming soon, TM, to expand its accessibility even further. Want to get your hands on the Ambire Wallet? Check it out at ambire.com. And now, let's get back to the show. Is there anything that we haven't touched on, Chika, that you'd love to kind of leave the audience with, or any major points with regards to
Mm.
Afropolitan or yourself that you'd love to highlight?
Yeah, I think the only other thing that is something we started to discuss, as Uzalu, and something I've been, me and my co-founder have been speaking, is that we think that Web3 is made for Africa, right? And not even just Africa, but even like you said, the global South. I feel like, unfortunately, crypto has been seen as a little bit Western led, and what's interesting is now they're kind of running into trouble where the US is not really accepting crypto like people thought. And to be honest, like whenever I'm in the US, I don't use crypto day to day, right? Yeah, maybe if I have an NFT or, I'm part of a DAO or something. But really, where I use crypto every day is in Africa. So whenever I'm in Nigeria, like even today as we speak, I'm already thinking like, oh, I have to move some USDC so I can get my Naira, right? So that when I get to Nigeria in a week, my Naira is in my account, right?
Mm,
So already I
yeah.
have to use crypto in order to function well in Nigeria. And so one of the other things that we've been talking about is how can Afropolitan start to partner with other L1s, L2s, and other crypto projects to bring them physically into Africa, because I think they're ignoring it. I feel like, whenever I go to conferences in the US, they're always like, yeah, like MetaMask, like some of the highest transactions we get is actually from Nigeria. Or I found out the graph that the second largest community is Nigerians. And I'm constantly hearing this, but they have not physically been in Africa. There hasn't been any major global tech conferences in Africa. Luckily, we've been advocating for DevCon to be in somewhere in Africa in the future. So that is a conversation we have started. And, we invited Vitalik. And so he did a tour across Africa. And we also hosted him in Ghana. And so this was a chance for some people from the Ethereum Foundation to connect and physically see founders and builders who are building on the Ethereum network. And we're looking to do this across many different L1s and L2s. And so I think for us, I want people to also leave with the thought of that if you don't really know what crypto is made for, go to places like, Nigeria, Zambia, Zanzibar, South Africa, even in Egypt. They are using crypto on a daily basis because it's a need, not a want.
100%. Thank you. Yeah, I mean, I think that is such an important part of this whole set of the conversations that we're having as well. Is like crypto has its strongest product market fit in the global south. Like
Hmm.
unequivocally, that is the case. Whether we talk
Yeah.
about financial transfers, governance systems, bringing more transparency to those governance systems, for example, being able to support underfunded and marginalized artists and giving them access to like global networks of collectors, for example, like I'm like totally with you on that, and we'll keep sounding that drum of we need to keep thinking about what does a crypto adoption look like in the global south. How can we build, because oftentimes that's a problem, is a lot of these projects and products are built in the global north, and then it's like, oh yeah, actually, with the graph, like most of our users are Nigerian, or many of our users, right? Or MetaMask as well. And so I think there's sort of two sides of that. One is how can we take a lot of the projects that are being developed in the north and help them contextualize and tropicalize
Yeah.
themselves to other countries. But I also think there's another really important part of that conversation that's like, hey, we have the highest adoption, we have a really strong user base. Let's support and nurture local startups in the ecosystem,
Yeah.
And you're doing that with this investment DAO, right? And like, how can we nurture more locally grown crypto projects, right? So we can also create
Yeah.
this more internal circle of economy and value that flows. So I think that that's like another really important part of the equation here, for sure.
Yeah. Amazing.
Awesome. Great, Chico. Well, this has been an incredible conversation. I know the audience is absolutely going to love this one. So just to leave things off, where can folks find you and Afropolitan?
Yeah, so just go to afropolitan.io. All the information is there. We have a Telegram where anybody can join, just to keep updated with us. We're very active on Twitter as well at Afropolitan. And, those are probably the two best places to connect with us. And then we also do events. So if you join our Telegram, it's a great way just to kind of start to learn what we are about, connect with other citizens, and start to really understand what we're doing as well.
Incredible. Incredible. You'll see me in the Telegram as well. So look forward to
Okay.
connecting with the audience there. And thanks so much, Chica. Have a wonderful day.
Thank you.
I hope you enjoyed this episode of Odyssey. And thank you for joining us on our collective journey as we look to explore where crypto has the opportunity to drive real world impact in the societies of tomorrow. If you haven't yet already, make sure you subscribe wherever you listen to your podcasts, and also that you've joined our Telegram community, which you'll find below. I'll see you on the next one.